Welcome to the Bluffton Biblecast, where together we embark on an apocalyptic adventure through the prophets and Revelation. Though it's a daunting task, we encourage you to embrace the challenge and find captivating truths from the mysterious parts of God's Word. I'm Becca Brooks, along with Chet Bumgartner and Darren Dreyer. Handling all things technical is Hudson Gerber. Thanks for joining us.
So before starting today, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room.
All right.
Well, it's kind of hard for me to say this, but I just want to say what we've all been thinking.
Which is?
I'm the man. I am really good at this podcast stuff.
Oh, I see.
Now, I'm not bragging. I'm just admitting my gifts. I'm really good, so I'm admitting it. But I think it's safe to say that I'm keeping the podcast afloat, and I think it's time to broaden our audience.
Are you?
Look,
Okay.
People enjoy my segments. I know it. Everyone knows it. And in order to expand our audience, my audience, we need to cover a broader content. Maybe bring in some more philosophy, humanism, even some atheism, anything to get me more listeners.
Hey, Hudson, go ahead and cut the mic.
No, wait, okay, I'm not crazy. Mom, if you're listening, finally, don't cry, okay? It's all good.
So what are you saying?
My hope is that all the listeners are disgusted with me right now.
Probably pretty accurate. Yes.
Okay, so, God was pretty disgusted with the people of Israel in Ezekiel 7.
Okay, so the little act there was to mimic how they acted, because they were exalting themselves and they were turning to other gods.
Yes, we read about their idolatry so much, sometimes it's easy to forget how destructive it is. Just like my arrogant attitude would kill the podcast.
Israel's arrogance and idol worship killed their nation.
Correcto. So God says to them, I will judge you according to your ways, and I will repay you for all your abominations.
And this is pretty thorough destruction, right?
Absolutely. Ezekiel walks through 3 foundations of society that Israel will lose. Take a look at verse 13.
Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller grieve, for my wrath is on the whole crowd. So it looks like commerce is coming to an end.
Yes, that's the first one. Now verse 14.
They have blown the trumpet, they have made all things ready, but no one will go into battle, for my wrath is on the whole crowd. So the army's not going to support them.
So commerce has failed, the military has failed. Now one more stabilizing aspect of society is gone. See verse 26.
They will go searching for a vision from the prophet. Priestly instruction in the law will cease. The council of the elders will come to an end. So their religion has failed. God's glory has departed.
Yeah, it failed because it was not based on God's instruction. Let's finish with verse 27.
I will deal with them according to their conduct, and by their own standards I will judge them. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Becca, got a question for you.
Okay.
Which horse am I?
What? I'm confused.
Yeah, and you were also confused when I asked you that exact same question decades ago. Darren, though, he knows the circumstances that inspired the question. He knows the reason you were confused then, and he can help you understand it now because he understands the historical context.
And the hysterical context.
Well, can either of you fill me in?
Well, for the sake of time, we're going to postpone that painfully embarrassing anecdote, but it illustrates a principle to guide us through chapters 8 through 10. You see, we can better understand these chapters if we better understand the historical context, or the surrounding related ideas within the Bible and culture.
So, in this case specifically, we need to know how Ezekiel incorporated phrases and ideas embedded in the Jewish culture and history.
Correct. Otherwise, we're only going to speculate. Granted, we're still going to speculate, but at least it gives us some boundaries.
Okay, can you give me some examples to illustrate this principle?
Well, for instance, in chapter 8, God gives Ezekiel another vision, this one about 14 months after his initial vision in chapter 1. And in this vision, God shows him women weeping for, I'm going to pronounce it as Tammuz, I'm not sure, but let's go with that.
Okay, who's that?
Well, Tammuz was a pagan sun god, and some sources say these women wept as part of a worship service that mourned his death.
So they were basically worshiping another god.
Yes. And then in chapter 9, Ezekiel refers to a man in linen. And Ezekiel doesn't clarify any further, but we can read in Leviticus that Aaron wore holy linen to enter the holy place.
So maybe this figure represents a pure, uncorrupted priest.
Possibly.
Is there any historical context to help us understand the man's mark from verse 4?
I couldn't find anything that exactly aligned with those details. If any of our listeners find something better, I want to hear. But I did find in Exodus 28 that God commands Aaron to wear a plate of gold, which declared holy to the Lord, and God commands him to wear it on his forehead.
Okay, like those marked in Ezekiel.
Yes. And though Aaron literally wore the plate on his forehead, I believe the forehead also symbolized the totality of a person's beliefs, faith, worldview, and perhaps his or her will and resolve, which God wanted to set apart.
And God still wanted them set apart or holy in Ezekiel's day. But how did the people in Ezekiel's vision set themselves apart and ultimately escape God's wrath? They presumably didn't wear golden plates like Aaron.
Well, unlike Moses' historical account featuring literal details, Ezekiel was chronicling a vision, which thrives on symbolism. So I don't think Ezekiel called people to seek and secure some kind of physical mark. God spared these people because they faithfully and lovingly followed his commands.
I see. People's faith-inspired actions constitute the true mark God looks for, both then, now, and forever.
Yes, though God didn't just randomly create this mark with no meaning.
So what did it mean?
Well, Ezekiel actually referred to a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Tau, which looked like our modern T. You know, the one long vertical stick with a short horizontal stick near the top.
Wait, the Tau resembled a cross?
That's what I've read.
Wow, so God essentially said he would one day set apart people through the cross, about 600 years before the crucifixion.
Seems reasonable. In fact, one author said early Christians traced the cross to identify themselves to other Christians. And do you want to guess where they quote-unquote marked themselves?
On the forehead?
Of course, of course.
In Ezekiel 11, this is the continuation of Ezekiel's vision that began in Ezekiel 8. He physically remained in Babylon, but God gave him a vision of the spiritual corruption of Jerusalem and God's response to it, both of judgment and the departing of God's glory from the temple and the city.
It mentions something about 25 men at the door of the gate, right?
Yes, a group of this many men is previously mentioned in Ezekiel 8:16, who stood with their backs to the temple and worshipped the sun as they faced the east gate.
So who were they?
These were the wicked leaders of a wicked city. These leaders said the time is not near to build houses, which seems better to regard as a question, not as a statement, as in, isn't it time to build houses? They said, this city is the cauldron and we are the meat.
Okay, I understand what that means, but Chet doesn't. So could you explain it to him?
Well, according to a commentary I read by David Guzik, this was a statement of confidence that Jerusalem would be safe and delivered from the Babylonian threat. Just as pieces of meat are safe in a covered cauldron, so they claim to be safe.
But what did God have to say about this?
Well, through Ezekiel, God turned their defiant claim of confidence into a prediction of doom. They wouldn't be protected in the cauldron, but would be cooked and then devoured.
Wow.
God then promised that though the devastation to come upon Jerusalem would be terrible, it would not be the end. The story of Israel and Jerusalem would not end with the Babylonian conquest.
So God wasn't finished with them.
No. Though they had to deal with his judgments in response to their rebellion, he did not give up on them.
So what happened next?
Pelatiah, the son of Benaiah, died. This was one of the leaders of Jerusalem. It was said that his death was a foretaste of what awaited the rest whom Ezekiel had warned. In a commentary I read, someone said the name Pelatiah means Yahweh preserves a remnant, while another commentary said the name means Yahweh has rescued.
So Ezekiel was really disheartened by Pelatiah's death.
Yes, but God promised to sustain his people in exile.
Just like God to have mercy on sinners.
Something I read in a commentary stated that this statement is without parallel in the Old Testament. The sanctuary was normally conceived of as a cult site or building rendered sacred by the presence of the deity. Here, Yahweh promises to be for the exiles what the temple has been for them in Jerusalem.
It's like they couldn't imagine God existing in a spirit form.
Yes, God then promises to gather and assemble those who were scattered in exile. He promised that Israel's time of exile would be a cleansing time, a time to take away their previous devotion to idols. This was fulfilled in history. The people of Israel did not have the same problem with the idols of the nations after the exile as they did before.
I love how God doesn't waste anything.
God promises to give them one heart and a new spirit. Throughout the Bible, God reveals his plan of redemption through a series of covenants. After the extended story of the fall and ruin of humanity in Genesis 1 through 11, the story of the covenants begins.
Was the first one the covenant God made with Noah?
Actually, prior to that, the first covenant would have been the one God made with Adam. I kind of missed that, but Chet pointed it out. As the Bible Project put it, and in their first test of covenant faithfulness, humans failed. They ate from the tree, fracturing the human-divine relationship and plunging humanity into corruption and death. We'd still be stuck in the wreckage if God never intervened. But the rest of the Bible is all about how God is repairing this broken partnership with humans.
Okay, I didn't think about that. So was Noah next?
Yes, God promised to never flood the entire earth with water again.
Then Abraham?
Yes, God promised to Abraham and his covenant descendants a land, a nation, and a blessing to extend to all nations.
Okay, then what was next?
The Mosaic or Sinai covenant gave Israel the law, the sacrifices, and the choice of blessing or curse as found in Exodus 19.
Okay, I'm thinking David was next in line?
Yep, you got it right. The Davidic covenant that promised an everlasting dynasty, a perfect ruler, and the promised Messiah. This was written about in 2 Samuel 7.
It's the plan of salvation.
Yes, God's plan of redemption through the covenants is completed and perfected in the new covenant. And while I would like to take credit for how the explanation of the covenants was all laid out, I must give credit once again to commentaries I read.
Okay, so anything interesting in chapter 12?
Well, there's so much in chapter 11 that we don't really have time for me to walk through chapter 12. However, a commentary I read by John Taylor basically said there were 3 thoughts. Number 1, we have heard all this before, but it hasn't happened. Number 2, those who say we will be delivered are right. And number 3, God will never do this to his people.
And I'm going to guess that they were all proven false.
Correct. God promised there would be no more delay in the carrying out of the terrible things he had warned of for so long. One commentator said, "The heart of man, set upon evil courses, constantly adopts one of these 2 expedients to comfort itself. Either it mocks at the prophetic word, or says that fulfillment is postponed."
That's interesting. And that attitude seems to be around us a lot today.
Thanks for listening. We hope today's lesson reminded you of the importance of humbly reading Scripture in context and careful consideration of His covenants.